Shalom and Shavua Tov. We're now at the end of a Shemitah year, the 7th year of a 7-year cycle, when personal loans are forgiven and the land rests from planting and harvesting. It's called the sabbatical year because on it the land rests like we rest on the 7th day. Now the year after Shemitah is called Hakhel, which means assembly or gathering of the people. It is the 8th year in a 7-year cycle. How can there be an 8th year in a 7-year cycle? Because Hakhel is entirely spiritual, beyond time and space, yet within time and space. And the coming new year, 5776, which begins Sunday night, September 13th, 2015, is the year of Hakhel, when the entire nation of Israel is commanded to assemble in the Holy Temple to hear the king read from the book of Deuteronomy. It is the great assembly, and it is the year of the Gare. I call it the year of the Gare because on Hakhel the Torah testifies that the Gare is an essential part of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, even though the Gare is not a Jew himself. The Gare is called Chasidi Umas HaOlam, a non-Jewish chassid. And why is he called a chassid? Because he goes beyond the letter of the law and does more than the Torah asks of him. As King David said, "Am I not a chassid? Do I not do more than the Torah requires?" So it is with the Gare. The Torah requires him to keep the 7 laws of Noah, and he chooses to do more. How much more? It depends. If he lives in Israel, or even within a Jewish community outside the land, he's expected to lead a righteous life that will not lead his Jewish neighbors away from the Torah. That's one opinion. The opinion of the Vilna Gaon is that if he lives in the Holy Land, within the gates of Israel, he must keep all the commandments, just like a Jew. Shabbat, Kashrut, the agricultural laws, everything. The standard question that people ask is, if the Gare has to keep all 613 commandments like a Jew, then why doesn't he just convert and become Jewish? After all, the Talmud states that when a convert emerges from the purifying waters of the mikveh, he is an Israelite in every way. So let him dunk in the mikveh with the intention of becoming a Jew, because anyway, according to the Vilna Gaon, he has to be circumcised. But no, the Gare wants to remain a Gare, meaning a Noahide Gare. Why? I've heard 2 reasons, and both make sense. One is the Jethro syndrome. Jethro did not convert and become an Israelite because he reasoned that he could achieve more by remaining a Noahide. He could return to his people, the Kenites, and teach them the way of God as one of their own. If he had become a Jew, they would have considered him an outsider, and they would have been less likely to listen to him. And he succeeded. Jethro taught the Kenites the ways of God and brought them to the land of Israel as Gare Toshav, resident pilgrims. And the Kenites became famous in Israel as great Torah scholars and a trusted ally of the Jewish people. I once asked Wendell Jones, Oliver Shalom, why he did not convert, and he gave me the exact same answer. He said that he could accomplish more as a Noachide than as a Jew. That is called Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice for the sake of heaven. That's one reason. The other reason is that the Gare says, this is who I am, this is who Hashem made me, and I believe he wants me to remain the way he made me. He gave me my own path, and it is a great and wondrous path. As I said, both of these reasons make sense. Now I would like to review a bit of Gare terminology, because it still has many people confused and upset, and frankly it can be confusing. In my opinion, the Torah intentionally makes it that way because Hashem wants you to dig for the meaning of Gare. Abraham told the men of Het, who were Hittites, that he was a Gare and a Toshav, a stranger and a resident. A stranger because he was different from a different people than they were, and a resident because he lived among them. He was not telling them that he had converted to be one of them. No, just the opposite. Abraham was telling that gathering of Hittites that although he lived among them, he was distinguished from them as a separate people. There are 2 kinds of garum mentioned in the Torah. One is a ger tzedek, a person who becomes a Jew according to Jewish law. To become a Jewish convert, a man is required to be circumcised and to immerse in a mikveh and accept upon himself the commandments of the Torah. And a woman must go to the mikveh and accept upon herself the mitzvot of a woman. A woman has fewer mitzvot than a man because she is exempt from most time-based commandments. This is an important discussion, but it's not the place for it. The entire life of an observant Jew is structured around the Torah and the commandments and the oral tradition. For a non-Jew to come along and adapt his or her life to completely change is not a simple matter and not an easy thing. It can take time, effort, and study. And everyone agrees that it should take time, both for the person himself or herself, and also for the Jewish community. No one wants to make a mistake here. And no one wants someone around who made this mistake and regrets it. I'll tell you the truth. One of the main reasons I teamed up with Rabbi David Katz to write the book, The World of the Gare, is because of the reports I had received from a friend of mine, a prominent Noahide living in Ecuador, who bitterly complained to me about the situation all over South America. He told me that Noahides are converting to Judaism even though they do not want to be Jews. Why are they doing this? Because they want to do more mitzvot than just the 7, but they are told that they're forbidden to do this and that their only option is to convert. And many of them are converting without wanting to be Jewish. To help rectify this situation, we wrote The World of the Gare as testimony that they can do more mitzvot and that they do not have to convert to do so. So here's the situation unadorned, the skinny, as we used to call it on the west side of Chicago. The Gare tzedek convert is given a new soul, now and forever. A convert can mess up this Jewish soul, God forbid, but he cannot get rid of it or exchange it. But know this, he has such great merit by his converting that he or she is judged with ultimate mercy by God, the one who is truly merciful. This is the blessing of Melchizedek to Abraham. It is mercy beyond human understanding. Melchizedek was the priest of Kel Elyon, God Most High. The bestowal of godly blessings from this level is all mercy and kindness with no judgment at all. It is taught explicitly in Shari'ara, Gates of Light, by the 13th century Kabbalist Rabbi Joseph Jikatilia. The Vilna Gaon, a great Kabbalist himself, taught that Shari'ara is the only true gateway to Kabbalah. Melchizedek's blessing to Abraham is from this wondrous level on high, and every Ger Tzedek receives it because every Ger Tzedek is a child of Abraham and Sarah. This is called salvation. It is grasping the tree of light and eating from it and living forever. Do you doubt for a minute that Abraham and Sarah are alive? This is what happens when one is given a name in Israel. That's the Ger Tzedek. Now let's talk about the other Ger mentioned in the Torah, the Ger Toshav, or simply the Ger. He accepts upon himself the 7 Noahide laws plus several amendments like honoring mother and father and prayer and giving tzedakah. Once he accepts the Noahide laws, which are also called universal Torah, his basic duty to God is fulfilled and he has earned a share of the world to come. And if he applies himself to the study of Torah, he is considered on a par with the Kohen Gadol, the high priest of the Jews. I'll be honest with you, I never felt comfortable with that teaching. Not because the Noahide scholar is unworthy of being on a par with the Kohen Gadol, but because it was said by Rabbi Meir at a time when the Second Temple had been destroyed for a century. And without the temple, the Kohen Gadol has almost no status at all. So what's the big deal about being on a par with a high priest with no status? I'll tell you what the big deal is. Even without the temple, the high priest is holy. He is essentially holy. Therefore, this statement of Rabbi Meir's shows us that the sages held that a Noahide can attain Kedusha, true holiness, without converting. This is a huge chiddush, but it is right there in the Talmud. The Noahide can come before a rabbinic court and be certified as a Ger Toshav, even though it is largely ceremonial, since he can become a Ger Toshav on his own by simply asserting that he is a Ger Toshav. Truth be told, he has no need for a rabbinic court. It's between him and Hashem, and no human agency is required. This also is an act of conversion, for the Ger Toshav receives a new soul, one with greater purity and greater sanctity. Mankind at large, whether Chinese or black or the Pope himself, has a soul of Sholosh Klippas Hatameus, 3 spiritually impure husks, meaning the spark of divinity within his soul is covered by 3 unclean husks or shells. That does not make them evil, that makes them unclean. All men are the crown of creation, and all men are bonded to God. But that does not mean that all men are spiritually clean. In fact, the Talmud tells us that Abraham gave his 6 sons from Keturah the spiritually unclean name of God and sent them eastward. Why give the people of the East the spiritually unclean name? Because that is the level their souls were on. When a person comes to the Torah by taking on the 7 laws, the 3 unclean husks are removed. Now he has a soul of Klippas Noga, a touching soul or a glowing soul. It is not yet a soul of pure holiness, but it is touching holiness and it is glowing from holiness. And with devotion, the Noachide Ger can attain true holiness. How do I define holiness? That which God has chosen as his own. As I mentioned before, because the Noachide Ger who learns Torah is comparable to the high priest, he can attain true holiness. His spiritual potential has no limit. The Noachide Ger can perform any or all of the commandments of the Torah, and he can perform them as he sees fit, though he is expected to do them within the guidelines of Jewish law. What the Ger gains, besides a new soul, is freedom. There is no one in this world with more freedom, a gift from the God who freed the Israelite slaves. The Noachide Ger is a unique being and a unique people who have their own path to the source. If Ger can be called a movement, it is a movement of individuals. Whoever comes along and tries to regimentize the Ger is not their friend. No uniforms and no marching in line. The Ger can go anywhere and everywhere. What needs to happen now is that more people have to get Ger, because the Ger thrives on community, and this is why Hakhel, the year of assembly, is so important to him. What does it mean to get Ger? It means that Hashem opens your eyes to the Ger in the Torah, and until you get Ger, you have blinders on, spiritual cataracts. It is like visiting a foreign land. You can learn about it for 40 years, but until you go there, you don't really get it. But once you do get Ger, you see it everywhere. Ger consciousness. I believe it is the gateway to enlightenment, and enlightenment is the truth of the Torah. The shingle that a Noachide puts out to say he is a Ger is the same shingle that a Jew puts out to say he is a Jew. The shingle reads, I keep Shabbos. Even if his Sabbath observance is only to say Shabbat Shalom or Good Shabbos, so long as he does something to express his belief that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. Interestingly enough, the 7 Noachide laws do not require a person to believe in God. All a Noachide has to do is be free of idolatry. But the Ger fears God and loves God and clings to God and devotes himself to the Torah and has bonded with the Jewish people. We learn this clearly from the mitzvah of Hakhel, which takes place 16 days after the conclusion of the sabbatical year. This year, the mitzvah of Hakhel will take place on Tuesday, the 29th of September in the afternoon. This will be the first intermediate day of the festival of Sukkot. Now let's gain some understanding of the mitzvah of Hakhel. This is the commandment to assemble the community of Israel in the Holy Temple. It is written in Deuteronomy 31, 10-12, and Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, at the set time of the year of release, during the festival of Sukkot, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God in the place where he shall choose, you shall read this Torah before all Israel within their hearing. Assemble the people. the men and the women and the little ones, and the Gare that is within your gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn and fear the Lord your God, and to observe and do all the words of the Torah. The key words here are assemble the people, the men and the women and the little ones, and the Gare that was in your gates. The question is, who is this Gare within your gates? It has been established as law that the Gare within your gates is the Noachide Gare, the righteous Gentile, not the Jewish convert. We learn this from Deuteronomy 14:21, where it says, "You shall not eat anything that died of itself. You may give it to the Gare within your gates, and you may sell it to the nachri, the stranger." The Gare within your gates in this verse is undeniably a Noachide, not a Jewish convert, because a Jewish convert must eat only kosher meat like any other Jew, and meat from an animal that died of itself is not kosher. Therefore, all authorities agree that this Gare in your gates is a Gentile. The Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, establishes this as the source to say that every Gare within your gates in the Torah is a Noachide Gare, not a Jewish Gare. This includes the Gare in your gates who is mentioned in the Ten Commandments as one who must rest on Shabbos. And it also includes the Gare in your gates who is commanded to assemble in the holy temple on Hakhel, the men and the women and the little ones and the Gare within your gates. On that day, the king of Israel reads from the book of Deuteronomy for all Israel, including the Gare in your gates. Thus, the mitzvah of Hakhel establishes the Noachide Gare as an essential part of the Jewish people, even though he is not a Jew. The mitzvah of Hakhel establishes something else equally as important. The Torah testifies that this Gare can observe all the mitzvot, as it says, that they may hear and that they may learn and fear the Lord your God, and to observe and do all the words of the Torah. Observe and do all the words of the Torah. That means all the mitzvot, not just the 7 laws of Noah. The Mishnah in Sota 41a describes the event quite graphically. It says, at the end of the first intermediate day of Sukkot in the 8th year, that is, a few days after the end of the 7th year, they erect a wooden platform in the temple courtyard upon which the king sits. The temple attendant takes a Torah scroll and hands it to the one who presides over the workings of the temple. And he hands it to the deputy high priest, who hands it to the high priest, who hands it to the king. The king stands when he receives it, but he may sit when he reads it. King Agrippus stood when he received it and read standing, and for this the sages praised him. When he reached the verse, Deuteronomy 17:15, which reads, "You may not put a nachri, a foreigner, over you," his eyes ran with tears. And they said to him, "Fear not, Agrippus, you are our brother, you are our brother." To understand this Mishnah and the Gomorrah that follows it, we need a little background. First of all, who was Agrippus? He was the last king of Israel, and he was a Gare. Agrippus was born in the year 10 BCE, the same year that Herod's temple was completed, and he died in the year 44. This Hakhel was the last Hakhel. It took place in the year 42. The temple was destroyed by Rome in the year 70. Agrippus was the grandson of Herod. His grandmother was Mariamne, who claimed to be the last of the Hasmonean dynasty, which was the family of the Maccabees. She was Jewish, and therefore the son she bore Herod was also Jewish. His name was Aristobulus, and he was Agrippus's father. Although the details are murky, we know that Aristobulus did not marry a Jewish woman, but I have not found a source that tells us her name. She was probably Roman or Syrian or even Egyptian, since Syria and Egypt were major players in the Roman Empire. Since Agrippus's mother was not Jewish, Agrippus was not Jewish. So here's Agrippus, a mixture of Herodian and Hasmonean blood, and not a Jew, but appointed as the king of Judea by the emperor of Rome. Agrippus was the essential Gare Toshav, a great tzaddik praised in many places and for many reasons by the sages of the Talmud. First of all, he saved the temple from ultimate desecration. The Roman emperor at the time was Caligula, a madman, as evil as he was insane. One morning he woke up and decided that he was God, and that all his subjects must worship him and place statues of him in their houses of worship. That included every synagogue, and it included the Holy Temple itself. The Jews were ready to lay their lives down to prevent this from happening. In the meantime, Agrippus, who was in Rome at the time, had a plan to foil Caligula's evil scheme. As a Judean prince from a famous family in Rome, he was friendly with the family of Caligula, and he prepared a great banquet in honor of him. The event was so spectacular, and Caligula was so honored by it, that he publicly promised Agrippus that he would grant him anything he wanted. Agrippus told him that what he wanted was that the emperor should not put his statue in the Holy Temple. Agrippus could have had anything, but he asked for this. Caligula was upset and angry, but he was stuck, and he granted the request. Unfortunately, a short while later, a letter came to Caligula from a Roman official in Judea saying that the Jews are massing together to prevent the statue from being put in the temple, and they're all ready to die for it. Therefore, the letter continued, perhaps the emperor should change his mind about putting his statue there. This infuriated Caligula and threw him into a rage. He immediately went against his word to Agrippus and gave orders to put his statue in the Holy Temple, and he prepared an army to go to war over it. By divine providence, a few days later, Caligula was assassinated, and now the Roman Senate had to elect a new emperor. Again, Agrippa seized the moment and addressed the Senate. This was completely beyond Roman protocol, because a Judean prince, half Roman and half Jewish, did not have the status to address the Senate. This was Hashem's hand at work. Agrippus recommended that the Senate elect Claudius as emperor, and they listened to him. It turned out that Claudius was a close friend of Agrippa's and was so grateful to him for helping him become emperor that he made a pact between Rome and Judea and even minted coins to commemorate the bond of friendship. For the rest of Agrippus' life, a short 3 years, life in Judea was peaceful and bountiful. The sages also praised Agrippus for his observance of the Torah. Now remember, he was a Gare, not a Jew. The Talmud tells us that he fasted for much of the day before Passover in order to come to the Seder hungry. And he was praised for bringing his own offering of first fruits to the temple, along with the other people on Shavuos, the festival of weeks. And of course, here he is in the temple on Sukkot, the king reading the Torah within the hearing of all the people, and weeping because he was not Jewish, and therefore he was emotionally upset, feeling that he had no right to being a king in Judea. And the people called out, "Fear not, Agrippus. You are our brother. You are our brother." Agrippus had become one of the most beloved of kings, and he was a Gare, not a Jew. This was one of the most dramatic and emotional moments in Jewish history, in world history. Only no one gets it because they don't get Gare. Let's look at the verse that made Agrippus cry, Deuteronomy 17:15. It says, "You shall surely place a king over you, whom the Lord your God shall choose. One from among your brothers shall you place over you. You may not place a nachri over you who is not your brother." We have to determine, who is this nachri? Nachri is a term the Torah uses for a Gentile who has not accepted the 7 laws of Noah. The nachri is not permitted to live in Israel, and he is not trusted. What I'm about to say now is not racist. I'm just setting up an analogy to explain the nachri. I would compare the nachri to a Native American. His identity is not completely known to us. He may be a good guy, noble and righteous, or not. I just don't know. What I do know is that he has not accepted the Noahide laws, and he does not walk in the ways of the God of Abraham. He has his own Native American spirituality and ethics. So I have no reason to trust him, and I'm not looking to do him any favors. Even if he is not an idol worshiper, the Torah is not particularly interested in extending kindness to the nachri, other than in the interest of peaceful relations between people who live in the same world. To the Gare we give the meat, but to the nachri we sell the meat. The Torah is telling us to be kind to the Gare and be practical with the nachri. And the verse forbidding us from placing a Gentile on the throne of Israel uses the term nachri, not Gare. Was Agrippas a nachri? Obviously not. He was a tzaddik who was devoted to the Torah and to the people of Israel. He was a Gare in our gates without a doubt. So why did he cry? Why did Agrippas cry? Because he did not get Gare. Agrippas was a Gare, one of the greatest who ever lived, maybe the greatest, but he did not get Gare. Hashem had not yet opened his eyes. He did not recognize his own greatness. Let's take this a step further. The Gomorrah comments on this Mishnah and teaches in the name of Rabbi Nosson Habavli that the people sinned when they flattered Agrippas, and they were punished with the destruction of the temple. The Gomorrah then launches into a lengthy discussion about flattery and portrays it as one of the worst of all human traits. I want to take issue with this Gomorrah and say that Rabbi Nosson Habavli, or at least the rabbi who said this teaching in his name, misunderstood the situation. They got it wrong, and not just on one level. They got it wrong on many levels. Rabbi Nosson was one of the greatest of his generation of rabbis, the Av Beis Din of the Sanhedrin, and a colleague of Rebbe Meir. But he lived 100 years after the destruction of the temple, and he was raised in Babylon. No Babylonian rabbi could truly understand the love and unity that a righteous king brings to the people of Israel, even more than the temple and more than the Torah itself. The king, and only the king, is the essence of Malchus, the kingdom of heaven on earth. If he is a wicked king, his Malchus brings with it pain and suffering and harsh judgment. But if he is a righteous king, his Malchus is filled with chesed and chokhmah, kindness and wisdom, and on his behalf, Hashem bestows lavish blessings on his people. The people rally to this king and are devoted to him. You know how the English are devoted to their queen? Well, multiply that 100-fold, and you may get an idea of how the Jews are devoted to a righteous king who fights their battles and is victorious, as Agrippas was. Because then they know that God is with him, and therefore with them. The king, more than anything, is what it is all about. This is why David was the most beloved of men and the fourth leg of the throne of glory. And this is why we anxiously await the coming of Mashiach, because he will be a righteous king in Israel. The word that the Gomorrah used for flattery is Hanifa. Hanifa means flattery and hypocrisy. It is not exactly the same word as flattery in English. Hanifa implies deception and falsehood. This is definitely not what was going on in the temple when the people said to Agrippas, "You are our brother, you are our brother." They were consoling him, not flattering him. They were sincere when they called him their brother, and they were justified in doing so, because the mitzvah of Hakhel certifies the Gare as a member of Am Yisrael, a brother to every Jew. Agrippas did not get Gare, and Rabbi Nosson did not get Gare. But the people who surrounded Agrippas in the temple got Gare. If they had said to Agrippas, "You are our king, you are our king," then it would have been Hanifa. Because righteous or not, Agrippas was not from the house of David, and therefore had no right to sit on the throne of Israel. Rome made him king, and from that perspective, he was a usurper. Calling him their king would have been a serious breach, but calling him their brother, this was actually very cool. And Rabbi Nosson should have praised them for it. I guess the moral of the story is that if one of the greatest garum who ever lived and one of the greatest Talmudic sages who ever lived did not get Gare, you shouldn't be disappointed if some of today's rabbis do not get Gare, or if your brother or sister Noachai does not get Gare. It's all a test of patience. Sooner or later they will get Gare because it's the truth. On that note, I will say Lashana Tova 5776. May we merit to see the King from the house of David this year and be with him in the Holy Temple. And may we all be written and sealed for a good and sweet year, the year of Hakhel, the year of the Gare. With Rosh Hashanah around the corner, and since all mankind, not just the Jews, are judged by God on Rosh Hashanah, I would like to mention an important preparation for this great day. It is called Cheshbon HaNefesh, taking stock of one's soul. This means asking yourself how you are measuring up to what you think God wants from you. It means taking stock of your good points and your not so good points, and promising to improve, to get rid of the baggage and take on the light. Everyone is expected to do it in the Hebrew month of Elul, before Rosh Hashanah. This is called Tshuva, return to God. 3 actions guarantee a good judgment on Rosh Hashanah: Tshuva, Tefillah, Tzedakah. Tshuva means coming closer to God. Tefillah, which is prayer, means praying with more feeling in your heart. And Tzedakah is helping others, primarily with money or some other form of help. What was last year, and what will be this year can be dramatically enhanced through knowledge of the Torah. On the day of Rosh Hashanah itself, we are asking God to be revealed as a king over us, which means to provide us with blessings, both spiritual and material sustenance, and to fight our fights, and to bring peace and harmony to Israel and the whole world. As it says, when Hashem is king over the whole world, on that day God will be one and his name one. With this in mind, we observe the great mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, listening to the call of the shofar, the ram's horn, to rouse us from our slumber, to snap us out of our trance, and to proclaim God as our king. And then it will be a simcha for all of us, and a year of sustenance and good health, and a year of aliyah in wisdom, and aliyah in Shabbat, and an aliyah of Chaim and Shalom. What did I leave out? And a year of anything good that I left out. I will close with a Gare Torah that appeared in last week's Parsha Ki Savu. It is found in Deuteronomy 28, 43, and 44, right in the middle of the curses that Hashem promises to bring upon the Jewish people if they abandon the Torah. I always learned that the greatest blessings are hidden within the curses. Here you can see it clearly. It says, the Gare that is in the midst of you shall rise up above you higher and higher, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. So what's the simple meaning here? First of all, the verse refers to a time when the Jews are living in Israel, because that is the name of the Parsha, Ki Savo, when you come into the land. So we're in the land, and there is a Gare living in our midst. This is the Gare within your gates. This is Agrippus. He is the Gare in our gates when we have betrayed God. He is sent higher and higher as the Jews descend lower and lower. Obviously, this verse is telling us that just because the Jews have gone against the Torah, don't think that automatically the Garum will also go against the Torah. No, they won't. Like the Rechabites, who Jeremiah held up as an example of people who kept their vows when the Israelites didn't. So we're being told that the Garum in general will be loyal to the Torah even when the Israelites are not. And God will reward them by raising them higher and higher, while he brings the Israelites lower and lower. Again, we see this in Agrippus, the Gare who was raised up as a king over the Jews at a time when the Jews were on the decline. Immediately after the death of Agrippus, the descent began that culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem and the Holy Temple and the slaughter of millions of people. You cannot descend much lower than this. But this is all obvious. This is all obvious from the verse. It's the next verse that separates those who get Gare from those who do not yet get Gare. The next verse says, he shall lend to you and you shall not lend to him. The obvious meaning is that if the Jews stray from the Torah, they will need to borrow money from the Gare, but the Gare won't need to borrow money from them because Hashem has given him everything he needs. And the Jews couldn't lend money anyway because they have none. So he will lend to them and they will not lend to him. This sounds like the simple meaning, but that's not what the Torah wants us to take away from this verse. The deeper meaning is this. Even when the Jew is down and out, the Gare will practice chesed with him, loving kindness. He will lend him money if he needs it. And this is real chesed, because if the Jew is broke, the Gare knows he probably won't get the loan paid back, but he lends anyway. The nachri would not be there for the needy Jew. And the goy, the anti-Semite, would kick the Jew when he's down. But just like the Jew gives meat to the Gare lends money to the Jew because their relationship is based on kindness. And the second half of the verse, he shall be a head and you shall be the tail, is telling us that even if the Gare is raised up and the Jew is brought low, they are still one entity. He may be the head and you may be the tail, but there really is no head and there is no tail. There is only one animal. If you cut the head off, then you have a head. And if you cut the tail off, then you have a tail. But in truth, there is only one animal. Head and tail are only terms to distinguish parts of the one animal. That's the meaning of the verse, and that's the meaning of Hakhel. One people assembled in the one house of the one God. Be'ezrat Hashem soon. Have a good gebenched year.